Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a look at a concept that is universally known, yet, as it turns out, profoundly misunderstood. We're unpacking a really fascinating August 24th summary by Pastor Fu Ziqiang, which dives deep into a devotional by John MacArthur. We are going to examine a fundamental principle of human interaction and look at it through the lenses of history, philosophy, and theology. It's going to be a great one, so let's get right into it.
You know the phrase, right? Do not do unto others what you don't want done to you. I mean, it's totally etched into our cultural consciousness. It feels like the ultimate, indisputable moral compass. But I want you to pause for a second and really think about this. Is this truly the highest moral standard out there? Or is our universal understanding of this golden rule actually kind of incomplete? Have we just been missing a massive blind spot in our own human nature this entire time?
What is the golden rule? Let's just set the baseline here and look at where this standard actually comes from.
So the classic formulation comes directly from Matthew 7:12. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Now, Pastor Fu points out that this one incredibly concise verse is essentially the total summary of biblical law. It sits right next to the command to love your neighbor as yourself. But MacArthur highlights a pretty massive catch here. While it sounds like this simple, beautiful standard, actually living it out in reality, it's incredibly profound and way harder than it looks. And a lot of that comes down to our own internal wiring.
Moving on to Part 2, East versus West rules. To really get why this is so tough to live out, we need to look at how different cultures historically tackled this exact same idea. This is where it gets really fascinating. There's a stark contrast between Eastern and Western philosophies here. On the Eastern side, we have the Analects of Confucius. When a student asked Confucius for one single word to guide his life, Confucius gave a rule of negative restraint. What you do not wish for yourself, do not do to others. Basically, if you don't like it, don't force it on someone else. Pretty straightforward. But flip over to the Western perspective, which the source illustrates using the epic story of the Odyssey. Pastor Fu notes that the ancient Greeks operated on the Zeus rule. This is a rule of positive action, meaning give to others what you desire. When they met strangers, they actively gave what they themselves would want to receive. So one is about holding back, and the other is about pushing forward.
So between Confucius and the Greeks, it feels like we've got all our bases covered, right? Well, maybe not. Do both of these rules actually share a fatal flaw? The source points to the famous Trojan horse from the Odyssey to explain this. Odysseus spent 10 agonizing years on the beaches of Troy before finally coming up with the Trojan horse strategy. But here's the crazy part. Taking a wooden horse, which was ostensibly an offering to the goddess Athena, and using that religious reverence as a deceptive trick caused a massive internal moral struggle. Even in moments of supposed reverence, human self-interest just totally muddied the waters. So do both the Trojan horse trickery and Confucius's wisdom actually miss a deeper, hidden problem?
Which brings us to Part 3, Blind Spots of Selfishness. Let's look at the core philosophical problem our source material presents regarding human nature itself.
MacArthur's devotional makes a pretty bold claim here. Human nature is fundamentally selfish. I mean, think about it. Our basic foundational problem is that we are just entirely preoccupied with ourselves. The text argues that every sin essentially stems from this total self-absorption. We're looking inward instead of looking at God or the actual needs of the people around us. But here's the real kicker. Even when we do practice altruism, even when we're out there doing good deeds, our minds are still completely centered on our own preferences. We give what we want to give. We help in the way we want to help. Our goodness is still totally anchored in our own narrow desires.
Part 4, McDonald's and Exercise Revelations. If all of that sounds a little too abstract, Pastor Fu introduces some highly relatable, everyday analogies to bring this right down to earth.
This perfectly illustrates what we're talking about. Let's say I am absolutely obsessed with McDonald's. If I apply the Greek Zeus rule, giving what I desire, I'm going to excitedly treat you to a massive fast food meal. But if you see that as high sugar, high fat junk food, my gift instantly becomes super annoying for you. Or say I absolutely hate sweating and I avoid the gym at all costs. Applying Confucius's rule, don't give what you don't want, I might actively discourage you from exercising. But what if you're a weightlifter who loves heavy training and absolutely needs that release? Or maybe I strictly avoid the sun to protect my skin, but you desperately need sunlight to boost your vitamin D. Do you see the fatal flaw now? When we force our personal likes and dislikes onto others, even with the absolute best intentions, we can actually cause them harm. We miss their actual needs entirely. The variable, every single time, is us. We are making ourselves the standard.
Part 5.
Agape, love beyond self. If both the Eastern rule of holding back and the Western rule of pushing forward fail because of human selfishness, what exactly is the answer? Well, let's look at the ultimate theological solution the source provides for this flawed altruism.
The answer lies in the Greek concept of agape. Now, the text is careful to define agape not as a fleeting feeling, but as a rigid standard of completely selfless love. It literally means serving the other person according to God's will, entirely detached from your own personal preferences. It's serving someone in the exact way they need to be served, regardless of whether they accept it or even appreciate it in the moment. It requires stepping completely outside of our self-centered human nature.
So the crucial point here is that loving your neighbor as yourself, as Matthew 22:39 commands, is basically impossible for an unregenerate person to pull off on their own. The source text is very clear. The power to live out this incredibly high moral standard has to come from outside our own fallen nature. It requires the Holy Spirit. Referencing Romans 5:5 and Galatians 5:22, MacArthur notes that it's the Holy Spirit pouring God's love into our hearts that actually makes agape possible in the first place. Only Christ's Spirit gives us the strength to love others the way He loved us.
So how do we actually achieve this? The source gives us a very clear roadmap. First up, we've got to acknowledge our inherently selfish nature. We have to admit that our internal compass is flawed. Second, as Jesus taught, we must deny ourselves and take up the cross. And this denying of self is the real game changer. It shatters both the Confucius rule of what I don't want and the Zeus rule of what I do want. It just removes I from the equation entirely. Third, we must rely completely on the Holy Spirit's strength, echoing John 13:34, to love as He loved. And finally, we act based solely on God's standard, seeking His will for the other person, completely ignoring our own preferences.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Pastor Fu concluded his message by challenging his listeners as they started their work week. And I want to extend that exact same challenge to you right now. In your workplace this week, with your family, in your daily interactions, will you consciously move past your own preferences? Will you stop forcing your McDonald's on everyone else and instead make God's will and true agape love your ultimate standard for how you treat people? It is a massive shift from self-centered living to God-centered serving. Really think about that as you go about your week. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep growing, and I'll see you next time.